Okay, chapter 3, and we're going to start to get into the nuts and bolts of how our system works, looking at checks and balances in this particular section. Okay, again, these are all just overviews. We'll go deeper in each branch as we get to later chapters. But the way this works is that the legislative branch has multiple powers. They can impeach and remove a president. And it's a two-step process that we'll talk about later. That's one way that the legislative branch has some power over the executive branch. Also, they can override a presidential veto, so they need to literally have like a supermajority of votes to make that happen. When it comes to the presidential, the president makes treaties, and then the president also makes appointment for executive positions. The Senate has to approve them, so not both houses, but at least the Senate. Same thing with judges, federal judges, not state judges, not local judges. Federal judges can be impeached and removed. And again, it's a two-step process. And when it comes to how courts are set up, and the legislative branch also can initiate amendments. And we'll look at how amendments are done. It is, it's one of the way. There is a way to bypass Congress to do it. The executive branch, it is the person who takes the laws and puts them into action. So that's executing. So there is always wiggle room. A lot of times laws are written vaguely, and then because of limited budgets, particularly when it comes to law enforcement, it's difficult to enforce everything equally. So the executive makes choices in terms of where money goes and how it's all going to be put into play. And so the president can veto, any legislation, and usually vetoes stick. It's pretty hard to override a veto. When the court makes a decision and something has to happen as a result of that, it's the executive branch that'll make that happen. And when we talk about the executive branch, it's not just the president, it's the president, everybody that works under the president and White House staff, as well as the major departments of the government. So we have things like NASA and Coast Guard and Postal Service and military, and all of these things are part of the executive branch. Judicial branch, we need to think of the Supreme Court as the highest court in the land, but there are lower courts. There's an appeals levels court, and there's federal district courts. There's specialty courts for things such as bankruptcy. Again, all bankruptcy cases are federal court cases of the judicial branch. And so whenever laws come about, and again, we are a part of a changing society, so the judicial branch is part of examining all laws and determining whether that fits into the box of the Constitution. And they can throw out laws that are not. And when laws are vague and not well written, the judicial branch will sometimes give guidance as to how the law is to be done. And so it is possible to, usually the only thing that can change a court's decision is a later court decision, but it's also possible to override a ruling by actually changing the Constitution itself. This is a nice little graph that just shows how each branch has some power over the others. So the separate branches we call separation of powers, but then also we have this concept of checks and balances. So each branch of the government has a check on the other, and there's a balance of power, and this was specifically written to take power out of one person, where let's say a dictator is judge, jury, executioner. Well, that's and lawmaker, and that's not how the system is built. And so this is the most important thing. When you look at this system, it leads to things not working as quickly as they could. So there's sometimes frustration over our system, but it was purposely built this way because the people who created our Constitution were looking at the parliamentary system. They were looking at monarchies and things like that, and they realized that there needs to be a way to give power to different branches so that there's no abuse of power.